is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Pride YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. I'm hoping that this endeavor will encourage all of us, myself included, to be better consumers of cinema. This week, I'll be reading through a review from the New York Post titled Ben Affleck Unsuccessfully Dons the Batsuit in Bloated Batman v Superman, written by Lumenick. If Lou should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comment section would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League in 2017 and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse 5-film arc and the direction that the cinematic universe for DC on film was heading towards. Before I get into Lou's thoughts, though, I'm sure there are some viewers out there who might think, well, Lou is a film critic, for a professional film critic. We'll mention that a couple of times in this review. This is a professional film critic for a major news outlet who is included on Rotten Tomatoes. So who cares what you have to say, Rebecca? And you know what? This is a question that you should be asking. I would ask the same question of myself if I was not myself. So I will give you a little bit of background for through a little video I'll play for you, and hopefully that will fill you in on some things about me that hopefully will help explain why I have thoughts that I want to share about this. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. All right, now that we have that out of the way, hopefully that fills in some gaps about my credentials, if anyone was asking about them. Right now we're just going to start digging and diving into the review. We're going to be doing a lot of that. So we're going to get into Lou's review here from the New York Post. And the way I usually like to start these is by looking at the title, see if it's got something going on in the title that's going to help us understand the review and tease things to come. David in the chat says this one is a very directed title. So yeah, I think that's something worth noting. It's not a boring title. It actually put forth some effort to tell us something about the thoughts of the reviewer. And the title is, quote, Ben Affleck unsuccessfully dons the Batsuit in bloated Batman v Superman. Now, I really, even though I don't agree with that and at any level, I think Ben Affleck was successful as Batman in the Batsuit, and I don't think Batman v Superman was all that bloated, especially when you consider the ultimate cut was 30 minutes longer. But I do appreciate that this title actually makes an effort. Some of these don't, you'd be surprised, but this one actually makes an effort to describe and tease what this review is going to be about. Because of this title, we know that Lou is going to make the case for why he believes Ben Affleck was a bad Batman. We'll see how how strong of an argument that is. But as a reader, this at least causes me to look forward to learning about him, reading his arguments to see the case that he is going to make. So I don't know, like I talk about with these reviews all the time, this may not have been Lou's title that he wrote. It could have been an editor's title that was added in. Who knows who wrote the title, but at least for this one, it is somewhat creative and makes an effort to try and tease out what the review is going to discuss. So now that we've looked at the title, let's get into the review. So it starts off with, quote, threatened in some form or other since 2002, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice finally arrives to kick off the ever-lengthening summer movie season and a long series of planned DC superhero movies that hope to compete with Marvel. Director Zack Snyder may have introduced Henry Cavill as the latest Superman and Man of Steel in 2013, but this bloated sequel is very heavily weighted in favor of first-time Batman Ben Affleck, unquote. Now, I am actually of the opinion that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is pretty fairly balanced when it comes to giving storylines to both Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent. So I'm curious to find out, if we find out in this review, why Lou believes that the film is heavily weighted in favor of Ben Affleck's Batman, because they both take center stage in a lot of ways. They both have I don't know technically if they share the same amount of screen time, but they definitely have storylines. For the Superman's got a storyline. Superman and Clark Kent have their own storyline. Bruce Wayne and Batman have, he has his own storyline, and then they meet together towards the middle to the end to really hash out their story together. So I don't really see it as heavily weighted in favor of Batman. I think it's actually much more a Superman film. If you were going to say one of them was more heavily weighted in favor of, I probably wouldn't say Batman, but I think it's actually a pretty fairly balanced film in terms of the storylines and what the film actually does. I think it's mostly about Superman because he affects everything, but Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Clark Kent Superman both have a lot to do in the film. Now, continuing on, Lou writes, quote, "The film opens with Soups's climactic battle against General Zod from Man of Steel as seen from the point of view of Batman's alter ego, Bruce Wayne. And it looks an awful like 9/11 and Ground Zero. 3 years later, Wayne/Batman still blames Superman for thousands of deaths at his company's skyscraper, but mostly he seems jealous that the hero of Metropolis gets better press than this Gotham City vigilante," unquote. Where is Lou getting 3 years later? Because the time jump in the film from the 9/11 Ground Zero sequence at the beginning to the next point in time is 18 months later. So that's a big mistake. that changes things quite a bit. So I'm not really sure why he says 3 years later. I don't know where he's getting 3 years later. So this is a thing that, and I actually didn't make notes on this. I made notes on everything else in this section, but when I initially read it, I sort of skimmed over the 3 years later. When I was reading it out loud, I was like, that's not right. But I think this is another good example of something that I want to talk about when I wrap up these live streams about the critical reception is that one of the things that I would like to, if I had the power to change things, this is what I would do. These are the suggestions I would make to improve film criticism is that I would only allow people to write reviews about a film if they've watched it twice. Because of stuff like this. Lou has totally missed a pretty important thing that's right at the beginning of the film. He watched it and then he forgot about it and then he was like, "Oh, yeah, I gotta write about it." And he just put this in here as if it's true when it's not. 18 months and 3 years is very different. That's a substantial difference in time. So I don't, because if you make the case that, oh, Bruce Wayne is still mad 3 years later, it's like, he's really holding a grudge. But 18 months, that's pretty fresh. There's a good case to be made that Batman could still be questioning this Superman guy 18 months later. There's a quite a bit of difference there in terms of characterization and storylines. So it's interesting to me that a professional film critic would get something like that entirely wrong. I mean, it's wrong. It's just false. It's not right. But he writes it as with the confidence of somebody who remembered it being 3 years later. So I would suggest that film critics, if you're going to review something, at least watch it twice, because then you get the experience of seeing the film for the first time. And then the second go around, you can pay attention to all the details and understand things a little better. And you might see something the second time that you missed the first time. I do that on my own personal time. I recently reviewed DC League of Super Pets for Supergirl Radio, the podcast that I do every week. And I didn't want to just go once. I went twice. Even if it's an animated feature film directed towards kids, I watched it twice so that I could better understand the characters and the storyline and the animation and everything that was going on inside the film. So I even treat animated feature films for kids like that. That's just the bare minimum that you can do as a film critic. I realize that they review a lot of films, and so they might not have time for that. But if you're gonna review a film, I think it should be required that you see it at least twice, because you're less likely to make these kinds of mistakes if you do that, because you're gonna the second time around you're gonna pay attention a little more. So I didn't intend to speak on the 3 years later thing, but that's a pretty significant thing in my opinion, because it's just flat out wrong. So in addition to that, these reviews always love to bring up the similarities to 9/11, and they often make it sound negative when doing so, because 9/11 was a tragedy. It was a terrible day. A lot of lives were lost, and it was a terrible event that happened in the history of the United States. But having said that, then these reviewers never seem to mention why the parallel might be fitting in Batman v Superman and would actually help visually depict the world changing that is due to an event like the arrival of Superman and alien threats. The General Zod Superman fight would be a not exactly like 9/11, but it would be a big event that would change things. It would be completely different after Superman arrives. The city of Metropolis would be completely different after that battle between those two Kryptonians. So while I understand that some people think that's offensive, or they think it's something that people shouldn't do, I think it actually helps to help us get inside what the people of Metropolis would think about all of that. That it would be a very sad day, that lives had been lost during that event, that it was a chaotic time, that people didn't know if they were going to live or they were going to die. And it would be such a like life-changing, world-changing event. So I understand why it looks the way it does. And I think that's intentional by Zack Snyder to make it like that. He even goes as far as to show the firefighters in Metropolis and how they would have helped to step in and save people, and that they would be so important on a day like that, which was the reality of 9/11. Those firefighters were heroes. So I think it's unfortunate that people just put that in there, but don't actually look at the context of what's happening in that Man of Steel sequence and why visually it might be depicted that way. Because buildings would have fallen over. Those two Kryptonians crashed into them, destroyed stuff. I mean, Metropolis would have been a wreck. So you can't just gloss over that and act like nothing happened. You have to, as a filmmaker, I think, you have to make those consequences feel real for what's happening in the story. And I know Zack Snyder is big on showing those consequences, even if it means showing violent things. It's a way to show that there are consequences to these actions that these characters are doing in the story. And so it sort of bothers me that these reviewers put that out there and then don't follow up with, well, maybe it would be like that. Maybe it would be it would look like that in Metropolis on that day. So it's just one of the things that kind of bothers me. I know it's a sensitive subject, and probably rightfully so. But I think if you look at the story of what's happening during the Battle of Metropolis, I think it makes it very realistic. And that's one of the things I like about the Snyderverse and Zack Snyder's take on Superman, is that he approaches it with, well, what if Superman was real? What if Superman actually came to Earth? How would we react to him? What would we do? What would that be like? What would that look like? And I like that. I like seeing the reality of what would happen if Superman was real. Because I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I think about that. What would happen? What would we do as a human race? How would we react to that? So I think that sequence is a really good one to depict that idea and show that idea in the reality of that situation. But that's not, and that would actually be something that would be an interesting focal point for a review. A lot of these reviews that I've been reading for this project that I'm doing with the Rotten Tomatoes top critics is that a lot of times they'll mention something in them, like the 9/11 imagery of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and then they just drop it. That would actually be a really interesting read if someone dug into that and talked about that. I would read that review. I would read that piece. I would think that would be really, really interesting. But they just mention it and they just move on. I don't know if it's because they have a limited word count. I don't know. But there's a couple things in this review that if I was the editor, I would prod Lou to keep digging into that thought, because it's sad to me that there's like little kernels of things that could be really interesting in this review. And it's not even expanded on. Even if you took the argument that Batman v Superman Man of Steel's depiction of a 9/11 event was wrong and you didn't like it and you thought it was insensitive, that would still be an interesting read. Why do you think that? Why do you think it's not appropriate? What would you do differently? That would be interesting. I would be interested in that thought either way, even if it was something that maybe I didn't agree with. I would be interesting to read about that. I would be interested in reading about that because it would be a perspective that you're sharing. There, it's your thoughts about the film. It's not just, oh, I didn't like this. It's like you would be digging into your thoughts and your perspective on the film's depiction of an event like that. So it's just disappointing. It's just disappointing. These are professional film critics who get paid to do this for a living. And I find their reviews so boring a lot of the time. Even and the sad part is that they don't have to be boring. These reviews could be great. They could be so fun to read. And they're just not. It's just really disappointing. I'm gonna hop in the chat and look at David's comments. David says we can all learn from Japan. 2 cities get nuked, and mere years later, they sci-fi it into a reptilian monster that is empowered by nuclear energy coming in to judge humanity. That's a really interesting point. I think that's something that can be taken from real-world events and then depicted in a unique way that still communicates some of the tragedy of that and makes it a digestible format for people to really think about those ideas. David also says, even though I'm not into like Godzilla stuff, although I mean, I'm not opposed to Godzilla stuff. I'm just not one of those people who watches like monster movies like that. I think it's really interesting. The only really Godzilla that I've ever really consumed is the end of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. That I find fun. So and also there's so many Godzilla movies. I'm overwhelmed by them. It's why I don't get into Doctor Who. It's like there's how many decades of Doctor Who? I just don't think I could do it. But Godzilla is a good example. David also says, meanwhile, skyscrapers get demolished way before 2001. Mostly no one ever calls those movies jinxing or you shut your doomsaying mouth lest it happen for real. But do it after 9/11 and it's never going to be good for action movies, shock and awe again. That's also a good point, I think, David, because before 2001, there was the Towering Inferno, and it was something that a lot of people point to as being 9/11-ish, even though 9/11 had not happened yet. And actually, the Towering Inferno is a really, really interesting film. If you've never seen it, I would highly recommend giving it a watch. But yeah, I mean, films, especially in the 70s, the 70s was a real like disaster movie decade for filmmaking. And so I don't know why you can't depict those things. I know it brings up a lot of like trauma for people, but there are, I mean, if you don't have a consequence of some kind in a film, what are you going to do? If you have 2 Kryptonians fighting each other in a city, how else are you going to depict it? How else do you do? I don't know how else you do that. Do you just have them fighting in space and they have this big battle in space like Superman 4, The Quest for Peace? I guess you could do that. It's pretty boring for them to fight in space with relatively no danger, no risk that anyone's taking, no stakes. So I don't know how you do that. If you as a filmmaker were wanting to not go there, then what do you do? I guess is the question. So, I guess that's what every filmmaker has to go through in terms of how they want to demonstrate what they're trying to communicate and tell their story. They want to do it. So I guess that's just something that everybody has to think about when they're making films. Let's see. David also says, every time the military gets sneak attacked by people or by Martians, isn't that dissing on Pearl Harbor? Yeah, and we still, as filmmakers and film-going audiences, we still are interested in Pearl Harbor because it was something that was just so devastating, and it's hard to understand why that happened, and and it's just devastating. So I think that would be an interesting study, actually, to look at films that depict those kinds of events and dissect them. I think that would be interesting. It's a tough subject. It really is. It's a tough subject because you don't want to bring those things back up for people who struggle with that. But at the same time, it's like, well, how do you, as a filmmaker, how do you do it without doing that? So I think those are, it's a nuanced quandary, I suppose. Um, and David also makes a good point that there wasn't live footage of it happening to Pearl Harbor. So I guess there is that. That's a good point. All right. Also, David makes a good point saying Superman would have caused great harm when he moved the moon to create that total eclipse of the sun. Yeah, I guess there's those stakes. Something could have happened. But yeah, so it's a tough subject. But what I find lacking in these reviews is that they mention the 9/11 imagery, but then they don't go into it. They don't explain why there's 9/11 imagery. They don't explain that maybe there was an intention behind that, or what it meant for the city, or what it meant for the characters or the story. They just say 9/11 imagery and they move on. So I think that that's lacking in terms of analysis. That's all I meant. All right, continuing on. I'm also not sure. Lou mentions, he writes, quote, he seems jealous that the hero of Metropolis gets better press than the Gotham City vigilante, unquote. I'm confused about what this is referring to. I'm not sure if anyone else has an idea about what Lou's talking about here. My only guess is maybe he's referring to Bruce and Clark's first meeting at the charity gala when Bruce talks about the puff pieces written about Superman. If that's the case, the comment there is not about jealousy of Superman, but rather pointing out that the outlets like the Daily Planet are overlooking the threat of that Superman poses, that Bruce Wayne would think would be more serious. And Bruce is basically accusing the Daily Planet of only focusing on the positive aspects of Superman and not the more concerning aspects of him, because Bruce Wayne would find that much more serious to talk about. So I'm not really sure where the jealousy comments come from. I also don't think that's right. I don't think I'm a little concerned that Lou didn't pay a lot of attention to Batman v Superman when he watched it. But we'll continue on. So Lou writes, quote, after all, Superman's alter ego Clark Kent is a newspaper reporter, and it's in this guise that he's introduced to Wayne by Lex Luthor, a fiendishly entertaining Jesse Eisenberg, playing a slightly more evil version of his Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network. After an hour or so of build-up, Luthor finally engineers the greatest gladiator match of all time, which turns out to be not only 20 minutes of anticlimax, but the undercard for an even bigger and more ridiculous bout that probably should have ended up on the cutting room floor, unquote. Now, I don't know why Lou wants to take the Doomsday fight and throw it on the cutting room floor, because that's kind of a big deal. That fight ends up with dead Superman. Uh, you might want to keep that in the film, I think, because that's a pretty big deal. So I would not have put that on the cutting room floor, but maybe in Lou's version of the film, because he seems to be dictating what the film should have been instead of reviewing what the film actually was. That's what Lou would have done with this film. Now, I do appreciate the objectivity here that Lou shows here by being willing to point out that Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is not only entertaining, but that he's evil. Some of these reviews have downplayed Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor as something that wasn't menacing. Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is, I don't know how he would be diagnosed, sociopath, psychopath. I don't know. I'm not a shrink. I don't know these things. But he is a seriously messed up and mentally unstable individual because he does a lot of messed up, crazy things. And I'm glad that someone actually called him out as being evil, because he is evil. He's not like a laughable, silly character. He's a very menacing threat who does a lot of bad things to not only Batman and Superman, but everyone in the film he encounters. He unleashes an unkillable monster on the populace. Lex Luthor is crazy in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So I'm at least glad that there's a reviewer who's actually able to call him what he is, which is evil. So that I'm impressed with Lou's review here. My big question in this section is, how is the big fight between Batman and Superman anticlimactic? Because if we take a look at the word climax to look a little more closely about what it actually means, maybe we can determine, if we know what the word is, then we can determine what it means to be the opposite of that word. Because Lou here is making the case that the fight is that it has an anticlimax. So according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the word climax means the highest point, or the point of highest dramatic tension, or a major turning point in the action as of a play, or, if you want to look at it this way, a culmination. So to me, those definitions from the actual dictionary seem pretty appropriate for the Batman Superman fight. Isn't that what happens at the end of the Batman versus Superman fight? That we reach the highest point of dramatic tension when Batman is about to kill Superman. He has Superman on the ground. He is about to kill him with a kryptonite spear. And then the tension is actually released after the Martha moment, and Batman comes to realize what he has done and what he has become. That's not anti-climax. That is the climax. Literally the very definition of the word. So I'm a little confused as to why Lou calls it anti-climax, because it's literally the climax of the film. So I have lots of confusion regarding that section of his review here. Continuing on, Lou writes, quote, "While 300 Maestro Snyder puts together some very striking scenes, which may be enough for many fanboys, they never really cohere into a whole. He literally throws in the kitchen sink in a film that frantically introduces characters and concepts while never clearly establishing the rules of the DC Comics universe," unquote. This is another section of this review that I think could have been much more, I hate to use the word interesting, but maybe more meaningful, or maybe more educational, if Lou actually dug into the very striking scenes. What are those striking scenes? I would want to know what Lou thought were striking scenes in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Why did he mention that? He mentioned it and then never talked about what those scenes were. Why were they striking? And I don't understand why he didn't want to write more about them in this review. He's a film critic. Wouldn't he want to analyze scenes he thought were striking? Wouldn't he want to talk about those? In my opinion, this review would be way more interesting to have the film critic talk about film and why something works. Why were those scenes striking and others weren't? What about those scenes made them striking? I would want to know what those were. Of course, Lou doesn't talk about those. But I would be interested in learning about how those scenes, those striking scenes, weren't cohesive as a whole. Why did those scenes that were striking, that we don't know what they are, but why were they striking, and why did they not work as a whole? I would love to know that. You could do a whole review just about that. Mentions it, moves on. Doesn't explain it. We don't know anything about it. I guess we're just supposed to take Lou's word for it, even though he said 3 years later and it was 18 months later in the film. I guess we're just supposed to accept whatever Lou says. So it's just like they just throw things out there and then they just run. It's almost like they throw something at somebody's window, like a rock. It's like a little pebble at somebody's window, and then right as somebody like opens the window to figure out who threw the rock, they run away. Like, that's what these reviews are like. I know that's a terrible analogy. That's the only thing I could think of at the moment. But it's like they or maybe somebody taps you on the shoulder and you turn around to find out who it is. They run away. That's what these reviews are like. They mention things and then they duck out of there. And you're left like scratching your head, like, what are they talking about? Or I guess I should say, I'm left scratching my head, wondering, what are they talking about? So, even though I really wish we could get some justification for why Lou believes what he believes about this film, we don't get it. So, I guess we're never going to know. So, I'm just going to have to make peace with myself about that. Um, and I also have questions about what rules of the DC universe, the DC Comics universe, what rules does Lou think that Snyder left out? I don't know what he's talking about there. What is he talking about? Zack Snyder built an entire universe in 2 movies. He fleshed out Smallville, Metropolis. He got Gotham City in there. He got he got an immortal being like Diana in there. He got alien technology like the mother boxes and how it affected Cyborg. He built an entire universe with Aquaman and the Flash coming in. What else could he have done? What did he leave out? I have so many questions about Lou's thoughts, and Lou doesn't give me. He's not giving me anything. He's not giving me anything. So I wish I would get the answer of what rules that Lou wanted to know about the DC Comics universe. I don't know. I'm I'm perplexed. I don't know. But continuing on, Lou writes, quote, more problematically, even on a comic book movie level, there is no credible sense of danger like there is in the Batman movies directed by Christopher Nolan, who takes a producing credit this time. The demolition of an iconic landmark carries no more weight here than in Independence Day, unquote. No credible sense of danger. What is Lou talking about? Superman dies in this movie. What more sense of danger do you need than the most powerful being on the planet getting killed to save everyone from an unkillable monster? That's the most sense of danger you could put in a movie. I don't understand what he's talking about. It's also mind-blowing to me that a professional film critic would not understand the meaning and significance of the Capitol bombing. The Capitol in the United States is the building where the United States Senate and the House of Representatives meet. It's where laws are drafted, where they're debated, where they're passed. It's the symbol of law in America. Lex Luthor blowing that up is his way to demonstrate that he is above the law, that he answers to no one. It's Lex Luthor's answer to the question that he poses to Senator Finch when he asks, "Do you know the oldest lie in America, Senator?" And then he replies to her right before he kills her. He says, "It's that power can be innocent." In fact, he answers that question right before he dies when he blows her up in the Capitol building along with other governmental employees and innocent people and members of the press. And he does that to show his power. And power in that instance was not innocent. Lex Luthor might have seen the senators as the powerful beings who were not innocent. But in this case, Lex Luthor was showing that he was powerful. And so his way of showing that he is powerful over them, but it's also showing that he's not innocent. He's very guilty of this. But he, in this sense, he is attacking the power of the United States law-creating body of government. How does that not carry any weight? How does that not carry any weight? And above all that, Lex Luthor uses it as a way to frame Superman, another entity that he views as both powerful and guilty versus being innocent. And all of this, if you are paying attention to the film, plays into what Alfred tells Bruce in the Batcave about powerlessness, that it turns men cruel. Certainly turned Lex Luthor cruel. He felt powerless in some ways. He felt powerless when his dad abused him as a kid. He talks about that in that rooftop scene with Superman. He felt probably a little powerless when he was having to deal with the senators over getting the General Zod's body in his possession. He probably grew up really trying to overcome his feeling of powerlessness. And now Lex Luthor feels really powerful, and it's turning him cruel. And in the film, this is very true of Lex Luthor and what he has become after the Capitol bombing. He's become a cruel man. But here in this review, Lou, our friend Lou, says that the Capitol bombing doesn't carry any weight. Professional film critic. Got paid to write this. Okay, so continuing on. Lou writes, quote, "Part of this is due to Affleck, who tries hard to project weary gravitas like his immediate predecessor, Christian Bale, as an older Batman, but too often comes off like a self-loathing Oscar-winning writer-director cashing a big paycheck. Cavill is stuck with a character who spends far too much time reacting to others, whether it's to Batman's taunts or his romantic overtures of Lois Lane, played by Amy Adams," unquote. Just to clarify some things, Ben Affleck's Batman didn't hate himself. It wasn't self-loathing on his part. But Bruce Wayne was willing to risk his life to stop what he considered to be a threat to humanity. So I guess there is that. Also, I have a little bit of question about why the need to compare Ben Affleck's Batman to Christian Bale's Batman. Because other than their interpretations of the character taking inspiration from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, they're kind of different characters. Christian Bale's Batman didn't want to be Batman anymore. He wanted to retire. He wanted a happy ending, and he thought Gotham was better off without him. And it's only when Bane was causing chaos in the streets did he actually step back into action and come out from hiding, essentially, and become Batman again. Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight Rises fakes his death to allow John Blake to step into his shoes as the new Batman and gives Bruce Wayne an out to actually retire and live happily ever after with Selena, because there was no physical way for him to continue going on as Batman, given his age and his many injuries, as the film points out. There's no physical way he could keep being Batman because he had been so badly injured in his crime-fighting endeavors. Now, Ben Affleck's version of Batman, I think, is much different. He never retired from being Batman. He's an older Batman, but he doesn't want to retire. He wants to do things to help humanity, and he sees this fight with Superman as his legacy. He wants this to be his legacy, that he saves the world from Superman's threat. And what's worth noting here is that not only does he not want to retire from being Batman, he ends up changing how Batman operates after Superman's arrival. So he's still Batman. He still wants to continue to be Batman, which is very different from Christian Bale's Batman, who realized that the city didn't need him anymore. Gotham City didn't need Bruce Wayne anymore. They might still need Batman, but they don't need Bruce Wayne. So very different interpretations. These reviews typically like to bring Christopher Nolan in them. They like to compare Ben Affleck's Batman to Christian Bale's Batman, and they never mention they're two different stories, two different characterizations and interpretations of the Batman Bruce Wayne character, and directed by different filmmakers, written by different screenwriters. They're different Batman depictions, and that's okay. That's actually great. I think that's great. You can have different versions of Batman. So I think it's just strange that they are always bringing this comparison up without actually, there's no analysis to the character of Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne and Batman. They just compare him to Christian Bale, but there's no analysis of what is actually happening in the film. So again, disappointing for me as a reader. I would think that would be really interesting. What's Lou's thoughts on Bruce Wayne and Batman as actually depicted in Batman v Superman? I would want to read that. Lou, what are your thoughts? I wish you told me. Okay, and as far as he talks about with Henry Cavill, Henry Cavill's Superman reacted to others is actually the point of the film. I don't see that as a negative. His Superman is learning how the world is responding to his existence. This is 18 months after Superman debuts onto the world. And so this is the world trying to figure out what they think about Superman. This is a big deal. An alien has come to Earth in the form of a guy who can fly and shoot fire from his eyes. Maybe we should learn about what the world thinks of that. Maybe Superman should have to deal with figuring out how to interact with the world. He can do all these amazing things, but maybe he shouldn't do certain things. Maybe he shouldn't intervene with global politics. Maybe there are just certain things he should let humanity deal with on their own. That's interesting. I think that's an interesting thought with Superman. So that's actually, in my opinion, I think that's the point. Superman should be reacting to what others are saying and thinking about him. I think that's a pretty interesting and different depiction of Superman, because most Superman adaptations, I've seen pretty much all of them. Not in totality. I haven't seen every episode of George Reeves' Adventures of Superman TV show, but I've seen a handful. So I know that on that show, Superman's just the thing that everyone accepts. Christopher Reeve, he comes out and he saves some people, saves kittens from trees, and everyone just accepts him. The pilot episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, he shows up in the pilot and saves Lois Lane and brings her through the Daily Planet window. Everybody just accepts Superman. So a lot of these Superman adaptations don't ever deal with this. They don't ever think about, well, what would people have trouble with this? So I think it's actually kind of interesting that Superman has to deal with that. How does he respond to people responding to him? That's, again, something that I think would be a really interesting review. But Lou here drops that bomb and then doesn't dig into it. All right, continuing on with Lou's thoughts, we're almost finished. He writes, quote, constantly threatening to collapse from self-seriousness, this epic has way too much of everything, including CGI and Oscar winners up the wazoo, Jeremy Irons as Alfred, Holly Hunter as a senator investigating Superman, and even Kevin Costner in one of many ill-advised cameos, unquote. I wonder if Lou's reviews about the MCU talk about them having too much CGI. I wonder. I haven't read his MCU reviews, but I'd be curious. Is it overall, is every film looked at as having too much CGI, or just this one? I have a feeling it's probably just this one, but I don't know. But I think that's a weird critique, though, for a film about a character who, previously mentioned, can fly and shoot fire from his eyes. There has to be some element of CGI for that, because that person doesn't exist. So you have to use CGI to do that. So I also don't think having a lot of CGI in your film makes it a bad film. A lot of things have CGI in them that you don't realize are CGI. I was watching The Crown. I love The Crown. This is a side note. Big fan of The Crown. I think it's one of the best TV shows ever made. But that's, just my opinion. But I was watching some behind the scenes stuff of The Crown, and there's a lot of it, like outdoor exterior stuff, that's CGI. It starts with kind of a base, building exterior, but they build on top of it to recreate these buildings. Well, that's not too much CGI. That's just necessary CGI sometimes. In order to make these things come alive, sometimes you have to have CGI in there. So I don't think there's a problem from a film critic point of view of something having too much CGI. It's whether or not that CGI is distracting or it's not very good, which makes it distracting. I think those are valid criticisms. But the idea that it has too much of CGI, that doesn't make it a bad film. Also, is Lou criticizing BVS for having too many Oscar winners? Is that a negative thing? To have too many Oscar winners in your film? What kind of critique is that? I don't understand that. He also calls Kevin Costner's cameo as the ghost or hallucination, however you want to interpret that, of Jonathan Kent in Batman v Superman. He calls that an ill-advised cameo. In my opinion, the appearance of Jonathan Kent in the film is one of the most meaningful and emotional scenes. Clark is, gone up, as we learn in the ultimate cut. Of course, this review is talking about the theatrical cut, but Clark goes up this mountain to die. In the ultimate cut, the people there, the locals say he's come to die. And this is his Garden of Gethsemane moment. He goes up to this mountain and he's by himself. He's found solitude in the snow. He's found solitude. It's a kind of a metaphorical fortress of solitude for him. And there, up there, he comes into contact with this hallucination of his father, who tells him this story of how even if you try to be a hero, sometimes there are going to be things, consequences that happen that you cannot control. And you just have to try to do the right thing anyway. And it's one of the greatest scenes in the film. And I laugh because I think, why is this ill-advised? Why is this a negative thing for Jonathan Kent and Kevin Costner? It's such a good scene. It's such a good character thing for Clark Kent. It's such a good Superman moment because it also plays back into the Death of Superman comic book, where I haven't read it in a while, but I remember there was a point when Superman dies, and then I think after Superman dies, Jonathan Kent dies. It happens at like the same time, and they sort of, I guess it's sort of vague, but I read it as they meet up in heaven in the comic book, and they have a conversation, and then Superman is sent back down from heaven to rise back up. And I think that scene in BVS with Jonathan Kent is an homage to that moment in the comic book. And I think, to me, that's very meaningful. And the idea of what would you have a conversation with? Because my father died in 2006. What kind of conversation would I have with my dead father if I could have another conversation with him? And that's one of those scenes that I think about. It makes me think about my own life. And so I think it's really strange that such a good scene that informs so much about Superman in the film and then helps him understand how he's supposed to act as Superman. After that, he comes back into Metropolis. He saves Lois after she's pushed off the rooftop, the skyscraper rooftop, and he reemerges as Superman. And that helps him to make that final decision to stop Doomsday, even if it costs him his own life. And that's because of that scene with Jonathan Kent. And on top of that, I did not know that Kevin Costner was going to be in the film when I saw it for the first time. I was like, oh, Jonathan Kent cameo. It was so exciting. So I just think there's a different experience for someone like Lou, who sees it as just, oh, it's just another Oscar winner in this film. There's a difference between that kind of attitude and an attitude that's actually looking to analyze the film based on the characters in the story and what it's trying to say and what it's trying to mean. There's two different approaches to the film analysis there. And in my opinion, I would like someone to actually dig into those things. Tell me what that means to you. Don't just tell me I hate that. Tell me what it means to you. Even if you hate it, why do you hate it? I want some explanation. So I just think that's a really strange thing to write about the Jonathan Kent cameo because it's so good in BVS. All right, so this is how Lou ends this review. He writes, quote, Gal Gadot has little to do as the first big screen Wonder Woman, but until the tortuously protracted ending of Dawn of Justice, which is designed strictly to set up a planned Justice League blockbuster. I won't give away the big surprise, but rest assured that like everything else here, it's telegraphed well in advance, unquote. It's wild to me that reviewers like this one have no concluding thought, really. I'm often surprised by how these reviews are actually constructed. And maybe it's because I'm old school. And when I was taught growing up in middle school, high school, college, the basic essay, because these are essays essentially. You have your introduction, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them in the body of the piece, and then wrap it up, conclude it with tell them what you told them. And this is just another example of how these reviews are not constructed really well. I wish if I could change the the way that these reviews are written, and I was an editor for some of these things, I would recommend that these people who are these writers, that they would find a focus, a focal point, because you can only write so much about just the generic bits about the film. But maybe if you picked out a few things that you really wanted to hone in on and discuss those, that would be such a unique way of approaching it. Everybody else is going to do the same boring bits. Well, Gal Gadot did this, and Henry Cavill Superman did this, and Ben Affleck's Batman did this, and this is what, you know, there were no jokes. All of it is so boring and repetitive. But if you actually put your perspective into what you're writing and you actually approached it from a certain very focused uh bit of analysis, that would make a review stand out from all the other crappy ones, the crappy boring ones. So I think it's just really strange that these reviews just seem to all be the same thing over and over again, and they don't seem to stand out. This one I think is another good example of how it just does the basic thing. It's like doing the bare minimum of what I think a film critic should be doing. It addresses all of the things. It talks about Zack Snyder. It talks about the actors. But it's just you're doing the bare, you're like crossing off all the things as a film critic. Like, well, I got to talk about this, and I got to talk about this. It's like it's going through a formula. I think that's so boring. I think it's so boring. So it's odd to me that they don't have a concluding thought. This one kind of, like most of these reviews, it just peters out. The whole thing started with, oh, Ben Affleck's Batman was terrible. And then you get to the end, it's talking about Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman for some reason. What? Well, why wouldn't you just wrap it back up with making a quippy joke about Ben Affleck's Batman? Why wouldn't you do that? At least you're doing something to throw back to the introduction and to your title. It's just not well written. Continuing on, and this is kind of where I'm just going to leave it with this review. This is yet another reviewer, because this has happened several times in these reviews that I say we, me plus the live chat, a lot of people, kind of the people who come and hang out with me in the live chat, we are the we. So a lot of these reviews that we have been looking at, they kind of, I guess they talk about these things in a way that doesn't make any sense to me, because, and I'm trying to find the best way to talk about this, so the very ending here with Loserview, he says that the film, he's making the case that the film telegraphs things well in advance. Why is that a bad thing, Lou? Why is it, you make it sound like it's a bad thing, that it's a negative thing? Why is it a bad thing? Because to me, that's called foreshadowing. And that makes for good storytelling. I'm so shocked that these professional paid film critics who get paid to do this for a living, this is their job, this is how they earn a living, they try to turn the idea of foreshadowing, the storytelling technique as foreshadowing, into a negative critique of the film. You want your film to be telegraphed well in advance. That's called how to write a film, how to make a story, how to make a film. I guess that's how we're gonna end the review here. It's exhausting, really. It's just, if I'm being honest, this stuff is so exhausting that somehow foreshadowing would be a negative for film. All right. Well, I'm going to hop in the live chat, see what some people are talking about, and then we are going to wrap this sucker up. This one was kind of short. I'm guessing Lou here, to be fair and give him some grace, maybe he had a limited word count and he really couldn't get into some things because he only had so many words that he could write. So maybe there's a reason why he didn't explain some of the things that he mentioned. Let's see. Lost It to Bostic says, some film critics rely heavily on comparison, which is ironic since most also cry out for originality and or fresh takes on established stories and characters. I know. It's funny because especially in these Batman v Superman reviews, a lot of them are so over the Wayne family murders. They're so over it. We've already seen them die all the time. We've seen them die. We know what happens. Don't show it again. But here they are wanting Ben Affleck's Batman to be Christian Bale's Batman. When both of those iterations showed Martha with the pearls. It's so crazy. I don't understand it. It's hypocritical and it's contradictory. And I think for me, in my opinion, I always want to see something fresh and original. Even if it's the same depiction, for example, the Wayne murders in the street. What I like is that even though we've seen some variation of that, like in Batman 89 and Batman Begins, and Batman Forever sort of touched on the Wayne murders, but did actually really go into it. I think Joel Schumacher was maybe wanting to do it, but kind of didn't. You see it on the Gotham TV show. What I like is all of those iterations of the Batman character did something a little different with it. And the murder of his parents is such an essential part of Batman. So I don't mind that it's included. I think you should include it. But what I'm hoping for as somebody who considers herself maybe as an amateur reviewer who likes to discuss these things, what I like about it is that all of those adaptations had a perspective on it, made it a little bit their own, did something different with it, and I like that because it plays into that version of Bruce Wayne. They're not all going to be the same. If they were the same, there's no perspective. If they're different and unique, and it's based on the person who's directing it, that's a good thing. I think you can have similar things, but take an original, fresh take on it, and that can be good. That's my opinion. David says Hans Zimmer did the opening title music for The Crown. Yes, he did, in fact. Crown's so good, you guys. You should watch it. Even if you're like, I don't care about the British monarchy, it's a great television show. The writing is good, the performances are good, and the music, to David's point, excellent. So I just highly recommend it. I'm just always wanting to tell people about The Crown. So good. Okay, so let's see. Lost it to Bosick says some of these critics appear to look for reasons to dislike BBS. Too much CGI and too many Oscar winners are both excuses. They're looking for reasons to dislike the film. I agree with that. It's interesting to me that, especially in this review, it seemed like there was something that Lou thought was good about it. He mentioned some striking scenes. Why can't you talk more about that? But he focused in on everything he hated about it, everything he didn't like about it. He made that choice to talk about all the things that he didn't like about BBS. So yeah, he was looking for reasons to emphasize the negative instead of talking about the positive and things that were actually good. So there's definitely a choice there. Let's see. Spider-Man says, I love the Solitude Mountain scene so much. Yeah, I do too. I think it's so good. And the way that the sound has that like the wind that's sort of blowing, and it's almost got this it's almost a little bit of a mystical quality because it's just the two of them up on this mountain and they're having this really meaningful conversation. And for me, when I watch it, I'm really engaged in the story that Jonathan is telling Clark, because this is more about this is a teaching moment for Jonathan. In Man of Steel, there was a lot of teaching moments for Clark from his father. His father was always instructing him on helping him think through things, and this was another good example about that. Even though Clark is a grown man, he's an adult. He's survived all of these things, but even in that moment, he still needs his dad to help him out, and I think that's such a beautiful thing. So I love that scene so much. Let's see. Lost to Bostic says there is little critical film analysis of BBS by these critics. They resort to personal preference or nitpicking and focus on flashy twists or phrase or bombastic words rather than the film itself. Actually, bombastic is a word they love to use in these reviews. They love to talk about how bombastic the music is. Oh my gosh, it's so bombastic. Yeah, I guess for me, when I'm reviewing something, I think about how when I'm talking, like, and I do reviews all the time for Supergirl stuff on Supergirl Radio, a podcast you should check out if you haven't already. We also do live streams on Tuesday nights. So if you like these and you want to hang out with us, we do Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern over at youtube.com/DCTV podcasts with an S. But what I never want to go into something talking about someone else's opinion. Like, I don't want to have the same opinion as someone else. That's why I never, when we were reviewing the TV show, the Supergirl TV series, I wouldn't listen to another Supergirl podcast before we talked about it, before we reviewed the episode. I didn't read reviews that people wrote on the internet. I didn't really I didn't ingest anyone else's opinion because I didn't want it to affect mine. I didn't want it to sway me in certain ways about my opinion. I wanted to bring my perspective into those reviews. And so I think it's unfortunate with these film critics is that they just all kind of sound the same a lot of the time. They repeat a lot of the words. Bombastic is a word they like to use. A lot of them will mention Marvel, they'll mention Christopher Nolan, they'll mention Christian Bale's Batman. They just sound the same. And I never want to do that personally as a reviewer. I want to come in and share my actual perspective, my thoughts, because nobody else is going to have my same thoughts because they don't have the same experiences I've had in my life. They don't have the same knowledge base. Somebody might be smarter than me, but maybe we study different things. There's going to be a different thing that I can bring to the table with my review versus somebody else's review, and their review is going to be different from my review, and it might be better. I don't know, but I always, what I'm looking for in a review about something is getting to hear why someone feels the way they do. Why do they think the way that they do? Not what all these other people think. I want to know why they think why they do. That's why it's so disappointing with Loserview is that he mentions some things that could be really interesting. And then he just kind of settles into sounding like everyone else. I think that's actually, to me, that's sad. Lou probably has some really interesting thoughts to share. And he just kind of did what everybody else did. That's disappointing. It really bums me out, honestly. Spider-Man asks, are you a fan of Better Call Saul? Not that I don't think it's probably great. I have tried to start watching Breaking Bad. I'm still in season 1. I watched the episode where I forget what exactly they did to the body, but they basically used some sort of acid or something and disintegrated the body, and then the bathtub that the body was in fell through the floor of the second floor down to the first floor. And it made me kind of stop watching the show. I don't know if Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are for me. It's why I can never get into, like, was it ER? Was that the show? It was one of those medical shows that there was one episode I watched where they dropped a heart out of like a cooler, and it just like rolled around on the floor. And I was like, you know what? I don't think medical shows are for me. So I think maybe there's just some certain things. I know people think that Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are like the best TV shows ever made, and they might be. I have a hard time watching them. There are just certain, they're just some certain shows that you can hop into because it brings you in, you connect with the characters, you're interested in the content. Those shows for me are hard to get into because what's frustrating for me, to be honest with you, Spider-Man, is that it's hard for me, and this is why I could never get into Sex and the City. I tried to watch Sex and the City, but I found those characters, those ladies, so dumb. Everything they ever did in every episode, I was like, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. Why are you doing? I could not get behind those characters. And that's, I think, also part of the reason I'm having trouble with Breaking Bad is because every episode I watch and I'm like, you're such an idiot. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And so it's hard for me to get into it. Usually if the character's good, I'll be drawn into it no matter what it is. But I have such a hard time with those characters because I think everything they do is terrible and awful and wrong. And so it's hard for me to deal with that. Um, I don't know. I'm gonna try to see if I can keep going with Breaking Bad and just see how it goes. But it's been a struggle. So we'll see if we'll see if I can ever make it to Better Call Saul. I'll maybe keep everybody posted on my Breaking Bad universe journey, but it's been difficult. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you love it. Um, but right now for me, that's not where I am currently. Uh Lost into Bostic says I'm reappropriating bombastic from the film critics. I appreciate that. Let's take some of these words back and actually use them with some meaning. Uh David says look up TV tropes idiot plot. Oh yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch. I'd probably be frustrated watching that. It's so funny because like with 30 Rock, for example, I love 30 Rock. I'm a huge 30 Rock fan. Those characters on that show did dumb things all the time. But it's a situational comedy. Where would you be if characters didn't do dumb things on a comedy show? And so I think there's a difference between comedy and drama, like with Breaking Bad, thinking those characters are dumb, versus 30 Rock doing stupid stuff. Tracy and Jenna did stupid stuff all the time. And it's like, what are you doing? But it's funny. Which is tough with like Sex and the City. I guess it was supposed to be a comedy, but I never laughed because I was like, these ladies are dumb. I can't get behind. I can't get behind them. There was one episode I tried to watch of Sex in the City and I just quit. I was just like, no, I can't do this with these ladies. But some people love them. Good for those people. I'm glad you love those Sex in the City ladies. I could not do it. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, that's interesting. David says Sex and the City is more regular people being extra dumb. That's maybe a fair point. I can't say too much about Sex and the City because I only watched a couple of episodes. Because when I worked at Turner, we had Sex and the City episodes for TBS, and so I would have to watch them for my job. So it's not like I couldn't not watch them. I had to watch them. So there was that. David also says at least Walter White is a smart chemist. That's what's unfortunate about him. I mean, I don't want to turn this into like a Breaking Bad thing, but what's so wild to me is that he's doing all this stuff that he could choose not to do it. And I guess that's what the frustrating thing is about Walter White is he gets himself into a hole and at some point he could just not do it. You know, it's all about making decisions. And I guess that's the point of the show is that even from the first little bit of episodes, I think I'm on like episode 6. Did I make it that far with the tub falling through the floor? I don't know. Maybe it's like episode 4 or something. I'm not that far into it. I really had to. Maybe I'll try. I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna try to get back into it. That tub falling through the floor with all the guts and stuff in it. I was just like, I don't know if this show is for me, but I'm trying to get through it because my friend Jeremy really loves the show and he wants me to watch it. And because I respect him as a human being, I will try to suck it up and try to watch it for him. Okay, well, that is going to, I guess, wrap up this week's look at the New York Post review of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Thank you for everybody in the chat who shared your thoughts and got into some fun discussions about television. And maybe in the future, once I'm finished with BBS, maybe I'll talk about some TV stuff. That might be a fun chance to do something a little different. We can talk about some films, but maybe some TV stuff. That'd be a fun time. Okay. Let's see. So I think that's going to do it for this week's live stream. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. If you ever have any questions about when I'm going to be live, just check this YouTube channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod. I'll be scheduling streams in advance when I'm available. Sometimes if I'm traveling or if I'm out of town, sometimes I can't do them. So just check on the YouTube channel to see when I'm going to be live. You can get notified so that YouTube will let you know. I'm going to be going to Dragon Con, so I'm going to try to do a stream next week. But but the next week, Labor Day weekend, I'm going to take a week off for Dragon Con because I will be busy doing nerdy things and hopefully having a great time in the ATL. So just stay posted, check the channel, and click on that notification. It'll let you know when I go live. And as always, if you have a BVS review or maybe even just like a DC film Snyderverse review that you think knocks it out of the park, we talk about reviews here that are pretty lacking, to be honest. But if you have a review you think is great and that adds some meaningful discussion to the films, let me know. Share a link with me in the comment section below. I'll share it with the class so that everybody gets to see it, because I think it's also a worthwhile endeavor to look at reviews that are done well. Are they written well? Do they have meaningful things to say? Do they share insights that are from the reviewer's perspective that you don't get somewhere else? I think those are valuable things to look at. So if you have any reviews you want to suggest, please share them with me. All right. Well, I think we've accomplished a lot of things in this live stream and talked a lot about some serious stuff and some gross stuff like bodies falling through floors. That's going to be taken out of context. Really, I'm just talking about that Breaking Bad episode from season 1. But we talked a lot of things, and I thank everybody for joining me. But now I'm going to let voiceover Rebecca take us out, and I'll see you next time. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at TheDerbyKid and on Vero at DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTVPodcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.